Barnes & Noble Audio.
This is Jim Mustick for Barnes & Noble. For this episode of the B&N podcast, I'm delighted to be speaking with the author of Fire and Fury, Inside the Trump White House, which is certainly the book of the week, the month, and most likely the year. It's insightful, often intimate, and very important look at the personalities and peculiarities of the current political order makes for riveting and often ruefully entertaining reading. Michael Wolff, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with the logistics. At the beginning of the book, you write, shortly after January 20, I took up something like a semi-permanent seat on a couch in the West Wing. A real couch or a metaphorical couch?
An absolutely accurate couch. And in fact, there are two couches. And so sometimes I would trade it up and shift to the other couch. So that was a very exciting moment.
So can you tell us what the days were like? You'd come in, you'd sit there, people would pass. How actually did the reporting transpire?
So I was given this access in essence by the president, but it was an odd sort of access, and in that it was more. Instead of being invited in, it was more, we won't throw you out. And I actually went in and I said to the president early on, I said, listen, I'd like to, this was during the transition, and I said, I'd like to come down and just observe what's going on. And he thought I was asking for a job. And I said, no, I don't. I said, I want to write a book. And I can see right in front of me now his face falling. That seems so uninteresting to him. But he sort of said, oh, okay, knock yourself out. And that was an odd thing in which I could then say to people, I've spoken to the president, and he says, yeah, fine. And everybody kind of went, oh, okay. And then I started making appointments with people, and that was the way it functioned. I would make a set of appointments each day, and whoever had the first appointment would put you into the system, and then you would be just kind of waved into the West Wing, and it was in all White Houses are like this, but this White House even more so, which is that you made an appointment, but nobody kept the appointments. So you would literally come in at 10 o'clock, and it could be that you're sitting on that couch until 3 o'clock. Over time, and this was kind of humiliating. I'm not important enough for anyone to keep their appointments with me. But then, in fact, that turned out to be quite useful. I was I became a familiar and non-threatening presence. And so over time, people would say, they would see me and they would say, oh, who are you waiting for? And I was, Steve Bannon, and they would say, that's going to be hours. So why don't you come back and have a Diet Coke? And then so you would sit with somebody else, and they would talk. So I kind of became this, I don't know, sort of a black hole. Why not talk to me? I'm just there, and I'm not there as a member of the press. I'm there as a visitor, and I'm not acting like a member of the press. I'm not really asking anybody any questions. I'm just listening.
You originally had the intention of covering the first 100 days, I believe.
Right.
And then this expanded.
In administrations, traditional White Houses, 100 days is a kind of a line in the sand. What can we accomplish in 100 days? And partly because in the Trump White House, nobody knew anything about being in a White House. It was a blank page for everyone. That there wasn't that 100 days didn't really have an end, and it in fact just kept going on. And as we've seen, the explosions every day. It was, and this was one of the things in in writing the book, a real question: how do you ever end this?
Mm-hmm.
And so it pushed on beyond 100 days with me basically looking for an end, or said another way, just on this wild ride, and you couldn't get off.
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately, when at the end of the summer, when Steve Bannon left, when John Kelly came in, I said, okay, that's a first act of this presidency. I can end it here.
There are in places an almost Dickensian brio to the book. The characters bordering on caricature in a way that might lead us to question your veracity, except it seems to be validated by everything we know of them outside the book, what they've said and by their own actions. And you're very good at capturing this. One of the delights is the felicities of description you have. I remember particularly when you described Steve Bannon as a character from an Elmore Leonard novel, which seemed exactly on target. Can you tell us about how, as a writer, you approached the material? I mean, because you're in the White House, it's history, or whatever we're calling it now, being made, and this seemed to require a slightly different approach because the personalities were so large and unfettered in a way that I think is not often the case.
And that was great for me. I mean, I think it's probably not so great for the country, but for a writer, it was terrific. Mm-hmm. I mean, all of these characters, it's like you cannot believe the luck as a writer, the luck that you have. I mean, Donald Trump is an extraordinary character, larger than life, kind of larger than life. Steve Bannon, a complete gift. You think, oh my goodness, I cannot believe I get this character. And almost everybody in the White House, even the smaller characters, became larger because they're dealing with such an extraordinary circumstance. So, as a writer, and that's what I am principally see myself as a writer rather than a journalist, and certainly rather than a Washington press corps journalist. I'm really interested in characters, in people, in the situations, the strange situations that they find themselves in. And this really couldn't have been better for me as a writer.
You've written a lot in your career about media. And as I was reading your book and knowing we were going to be speaking, I recalled another book. Almost 50 years ago, Joe McGinnis wrote a book about the '68 campaign called The Selling of the President, which seems kind of quaint and innocent compared to what's happened in the decades since then. But there's a way in which the campaign, this particular campaign, and Trump's real mastery of publicity has made, it's almost like an exclamation point on that whole process, where publicity and celebrity has trumped, to use a word, politics completely from the process. Have you thought about that at all during the book?
No, constantly. And I think part of my entree here is I was not a political reporter. I was a media reporter. And I think Trump was much more comfortable with that, mm-hmm. and much more interested in it. The truth is that Trump is not really that interested in politics. He's not interested in politics at all, actually. Right. He's interested in politics only insofar as politics is a form of media. That's what he wants, and that's what I think the terms on which he related to me. Many of the conversations that we've had were about media and media people. I wrote a biography of Murdoch. I am right. Murdoch's biographer, and Trump was fascinated by that because he was fascinated by Murdoch. He wanted Murdoch to like him. In fact, Murdoch doesn't really like him, but he was desperate for that kind of approval. So there was a lot of, when he spoke to me, a lot of gossiping about Murdoch. What
do you think is Murdoch's take on him if he doesn't like him? His organs, the Journal and the Fox News seem to be doing their best to be extremely supportive. Is that because it's good news in his estimation, or?
I think there are two things. Murdoch likes to, whoever is the president, Murdoch likes to have as much influence with him as, or her, if it had been Hillary Clinton, as possible. And I think that Fox, particularly, I mean, Fox News particularly has found the Trump ratings to be, like everyone has found, to be incredible, and so they've just sort of narrow casted down the down that avenue. But at the same time, as it happens, Murdoch really thinks Trump is well. At one point in this book, I quote Murdoch referring to him as an idiot. And
a little more colorfully, in fact.
Yes, a little more colorfully. And I've had discussions with Murdoch in which he's rolled his eyes and kind of slapped the side of his head and like, oh my goodness, what Donald Trump.
In the early parts of the book, you write, it's quite compelling to read how no one involved in the campaign thought it was going to result in victory. And nor do you tell us, did the candidate expect or want to win. It was all meant to be a kind of brand building exercise. And you compare it to the plot of Mel Brooks's The Producers, where we're planning on having a failure because that's going to be our success. Could you talk a little bit about that?
And even more so that if we do succeed, that would be a catastrophe because we will be found out. And I think that's actually what happened. That's what we are seeing before us. These people are being found out. I mean, nobody was prepared to be. He was not prepared to be the president, and nobody around him was prepared to staff and run a White House. And of course, there are all of the other conflicts and financial issues and the Russian issues, and they stand exposed because they won. Now, if they had lost, I think life would have been fabulous. I mean, Trump would have been the most famous man in the world, able to do anything and not having to work too hard. Mm-hmm. Steve Bannon would have been the head of the Tea Party. Kellyanne Conway would have had a big cable contract. Jared and Ivanka would have gone from local socialites to international celebrities. Life would have been grand.
At one point, you quote Steve Bannon, and he's talking about Barack Obama. And this is from the book. Politics, said Bannon with an authority that belied the fact that until the previous August he had never worked in politics, is a more immediate game than he, Obama, ever played it. It's an interesting comment because it is making politics a very short-term game. It is stripping all context and history from the process. And that's in line with the whole, what we were talking about before, of publicity and celebrity being the linchpin of campaigns now. It's all a kind of stage set, and it can be reset by Twitter. It's a kind of manufactured reality. How much of this is Trump? He certainly plays that game extremely well. But how much of it is a larger trend in the world that's so media and social media saturated today?
Well, I think both things. Trump is come the time, come the man. But there's another point that I think Steve was making, and it's profound, which is that somehow the language of politics had diverged from the emotional lives of many people in the country, so that Barack Obama, as deft and often brilliant as he wasn't communicating. A lot of people felt on the outside of what Barack Obama was talking about. Barack Obama was talking to other people but them. And Trump comes along. I pick up a lot of the Trump speeches almost whole, where you would normally quote someone and take a few lines or a paragraph. I would find myself unable to cut down several pages because it's so extraordinary what he says. It's both incoherent and at the same time riveting. And somehow, and I certainly never would have predicted this, but Steve Bannon really cued into this. This was a kind of language that suddenly spoke to a lot of people who Barack Obama, who was precise, clear, and spoke in grammatically correct sentences, didn't speak to.
Do you see any irony in the fact that in championing Trump, the right-wing media was really polishing a figure who was in many ways the invention of the mainstream media? I mean, his railing against NBC to the side, The Apprentice was a mainstream media product. He was a host of Saturday Night Live several times before he became the target of Saturday Night Live.
No, I think that's a super smart way to look at this, and and also points to this fundamental confusion, and it's a confusion not only in the media but within Trump himself. I mean, Trump has the adulation of the right-wing media, but what he really wants, really right now, at this moment, I'm sure he's even thinking about how he gets it, is the approval of the New York Times, which he will never get. But that's where he is. He wants the approval of the traditional media.
The biographer of Robert Moses and Lyndon Johnson, Robert Caro, is fond of saying that power doesn't corrupt, it reveals. And you've been observing Trump for many years before he went to Washington. Do you think power has revealed who he was before, or what revelations have you found, if any?
Well, in a way, it's almost the opposite. That power has not changed him. He has always been Donald Trump. I mean, he has always been a person who's focused on his own immediate needs for gratification. He's always been a person who just wants to be the center of attention, good, bad, indifferent. He's always been a person who doesn't listen to anyone else, just kind of barrels through life with a sense of both entitlement, chip on his shoulder, and inability to see much to see really what the next step is going to be. This is a man This is a man who wholly and completely lives in the moment, and being president has not, and I think that's what we're seeing, or what's so startling, has not in the least changed that.
As you said before, he's very much a man of our time, and living in the moment, there's a great deal of emotion, elation, rage, sensational. It's all personal. It's like his life has been, even in his successes, one big selfie. But now it's not just his life, it's the life of the nation. And can you draw any conclusions, or what does this make you worried about anything from what you've seen up close?
No, yes, I mean, worried. I think this is alarm bells should be sounding throughout the day and everybody's day. This is a person, and it's not just me. And when I was very careful. This is not a book about my impressions of Donald Trump. This is a book really about what the people who are closest to him, who have to work with him on a daily basis, it's about their impressions. And I guess the most powerful thing that I learned writing this book is that these people are the people who are the most alarmed. Mm-hmm. that idea, I've written about other White Houses, and White Houses are, you surround you surround yourself, if you're the president, with people who are loyal to you and who believe in what you're doing, and you've bonded with these people on the campaign trail, and it's a coherent White House. Even rivalries, are rivalries between people who think and who claim greater respect for the president. And so it was extraordinary to find and to really see over this period of time that the people around Trump becoming every day more and more worried about this man, more and more perplexed about what he wanted, who he was, what was going to happen to them and their careers, and I think in the end, I kind of came to the conclusion that really it was pretty much 100% of Trump's senior staff had saw him as someone who was not able to, by any reasonable standards, function in this role.
Was there anyone in the White House whose probity or effectiveness you grew to respect?
And a lot of the people I respected around him, I think they're good people, honorable people, recognizable people, intelligent people, but all of them were stymied, frustrated, and finally they could not comprehend exactly who this guy is.
What was the biggest surprise to you in the process of writing this book?
I think it was that his staff thought the way the rest of the country, or a good part of the rest of the country, thought about Trump. That they were the people who, in a way, most understood that we had entered into this aberrant moment.
Is it fair to say, from your perspective, that he has flummoxed his own team with the same effectiveness that he seems to have flummoxed the opposition? They're in certainly the anti-Trump segments of the political establishment are in a reactive mode, certainly, and haven't been able to mount any concerted or even coherent approach so far in his presidency. It sounds like that's not all that different from the people who are ostensibly trying to assist him.
No, I think absolutely. And the fact that you had these factions in the White House, and these factions were entirely polarized between Jared and Ivanka and Steve Bannon and Reince Priebus, all who believed fundamentally different and inimical things. I mean, Jared and Ivanka are New York Democrats. Steve Bannon is an alt-right personification, and Reince Priebus is an establishment Republican. None of these things were going to get along. They right. just could not get along with each other. I mean, this was not a question of gradations of point of view. These were polar opposite points of view.
You may not want to speculate, but let me tap your writer's brain to say it's 10 years from now. Whatever has happened with Trump, he's out of office, whether he serves one term or two. What's he doing with the rest of his life? Where's Steve Bannon, and what are Jared and Ivanka up to?
Those are very good questions. It's very hard to think beyond the next day with Donald Trump because he seems like he's going to explode. Mm-hmm. One way or the other, this, and I think from the beginning of him running for president, we've seen this as a train wreck, that it was going to hit the wall. And I still believe it will hit the wall, but the wall kind of moves it doesn't go away. It just some crazy perspective. It just keeps moving out.
Yeah.
So I expect that Donald Trump, that we will hit the wall at some point. Donald Trump explodes. Jared and Ivanka. At one point in the book, and I describe a conversation that they had in which they make a pact that if and when, and I think they believed when the opportunity arose for one of them to run for president, she would get the first opportunity. I kind of think that they have realized that may not happen, that they're sort of concentrating probably now on staying out of jail. Mm-hmm. And as for Steve Bannon, I don't know. I mean, I came to like Steve very much as I wrote this book. I mean, I doubt if Steve and I agree on anything, but I liked him enormously. His insights were incredibly not only valuable but entertaining, and he was one of those people who is just is without filter. He narrates it as he sees it and as he feels it, and I actually wish him well, and I'm going to be totally fascinated to find out where he goes next.
Last question. Everyone in the Trump orbit seemed to be either remarkably or at least reasonably forthcoming in the conversations you heard and were able to observe. Is there something in this whole story that you weren't able to find out that you wish you could have?
Yes. I mean, I think Trump is a kind of void, and understanding how this guy comes about, who he is kind of ever elusive. I mean, I think that I've gotten. I certainly made an effort to get as close as I possibly could, and I think the response to this book indicates that a lot of other people want to know this too. It's like, how did this happen? It's not just how did this happen, but who is this guy? Who? It's just astonishing, and I think that this is going to be one of the subjects of our time. How do you plumb the depths of a man who exists probably only on the surface?
Michael Wolff, thank you for the book, and thank you for this conversation. I've enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to our conversation with Michael Wolff. To learn more about Fire and Fury, visit barnesandnoble.com/podcast. We've got new episodes with more fascinating voices every week. So to make sure you don't miss out, subscribe to the BNN podcast in Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Our interviewer today is Jim Mustick, executive producer of the BNN podcast. This episode was produced by Bill Tipper, with editing and engineering by Josh Perillo.
Barnes & Noble Audio.